Hey, I'm Alan Furstenberg,
Hi, I'm Sam Witteveen,
and welcome to Two Voice Devs.
Two Voice Devs.
Sam, welcome to the show.
Thanks, Ellen. It's good to talk to you. It's a while since we've caught up in person. I think the
You
last
know,
time was in the sunny Bali or something like
sunny
that.
Bali in September. Yeah, that seems like so long ago at this point.
It does seem like a few decades ago at this point. Yes, that's true.
And in some ways, it's funny that I mean, back then when we were talking about having you on as a guest host, I was thrilled really excited to have you on as a guest host for a lot of reasons. And we kind of were talking about what we expected was coming in the AI world in the next few months. And since then, not only has all of that hit the AI world, the next round of it hit the AI world before we had the chance to catch up. So I'm
Yeah,
glad we finally are able to catch up.
we've certainly seen a few inflection points. That was like the end of October, right? That we
Yeah,
roughly, or something like that. Yeah, we've certainly seen a few inflection points since then, and sort of industry wide too, not just with with Google sort of stuff, but like right across the industry.
right. So um so we'll get to all of that, and I'm looking forward to getting to all of that with you. But why don't you introduce yourself to everyone? Now, I know you mostly as you're a fellow GDE, and that's how the two of us met and talk a lot. But you do an awful lot more than that.
I do quite a bit of stuff, yeah. Okay, so I guess yes, I've been in GDE for 9 years, coming up on 9 years this year. Pretty much always been a GDE for machine learning and deep learning. That was sort of the focus that I got involved in doing stuff with Google way back almost 10 years ago now. I The other stuff that I do is I have a background in startups, so I've built a number of different startups over the years. The current startup that I'm sort of working on most is a startup called Red Dragon AI with Martin Andrews. He's my co-founder, also a GDE, also was in Bali with us, back in October. Um, my background is very different, I guess, than most developers. The sort of path I came from was nothing like most developers. I studied music, and in my
Okay.
20s, in my 20s, I actually was sort of a pop songwriter and producer. And so I was quite lucky that, so I was born in Australia. I left Australia when I was 21. I had a pretty decent, successful career in music. So, by my sort of mid to late 20s, I'd sold about 5 million albums of things that I'd written and worked on and stuff like that. And I kind of saw the beginning of the end in the music business. So that's a whole different story. But like, as MP3s got introduced, as some things changed in that industry, I could see that it was just not a good industry to be in. So I sort of made my way through a few different other paths, and then in around 2010, I think it was, I decided I wanted to learn to code. I was always sort of fascinated with coding and stuff like that. And I thought the best way to do that would be to start a startup that forced me to learn how to code. And so I started a children's app company. We ended up building that to 4 million users worldwide. And in the process, I learned to code. But more importantly than that, in the process of trying to reverse engineer the Apple App Store, I got into machine learning. And that kind of brings us to, sort of like to roughly to where we are today, in that sort of
So,
around 2012, 2013, I got involved in normal machine learning. And then 2014, I got into deep learning.
so Sam, I have to say, I did not know that story before. We have had guest hosts on the show who have had um, other non-traditional paths. This is the first time I think we've had somebody with a music background, and certainly that extensive a music background. So that's fascinating.
Yeah, actually, I guess I really should flesh it out and say I studied jazz piano, right? So that was like I even pivoted from sort of jazz piano to pop. Um, at one stage I owned a sort of chill out record company. that specialized in chill out music and stuff like that. Anyway, I around
So
2014 I got into deep learning, and that's what
okay,
sort of put me here.
okay, and as getting into deep learning and being a GDE for 9 years now, I mean, you run the local AI user group in
Yeah, so
Singapore as well, correctly? Correct?
Manan and I started what is now called Machine Learning Singapore. When we started it in early 2017, so actually I think this month it is 9 years. It's 9 years old. It now has over about 7,000 members. We do a monthly sort of meetup. We generally get around 200, 250 people attending each one of those meetups. We originally started out kind of like as the TensorFlow group, and that's kind of where we got involved with Google. Google hosts a lot of our meetups and stuff like that. I think Martin and I were pretty early to realize that things were going to be more than just TensorFlow, both inside and outside of Google. So we pivoted to calling it Machine Learning Singapore, and we pretty much cover like cutting edge research or some sort of topic of something that's really kind of new. So this week we're going to do the February one, and we're both sort of talking around things related to OpenClaw and the whole sort of world that has become OpenClaw. I think the current plan, and it's 2 days out, so it could change quite a lot. But the current plan is that I'll sort of break down a little bit how it works and talk about some of the patterns in it, the programming patterns and stuff. And then I think Martin's working on a version of it that runs fully on your phone, and how you can just do it all with your phone and sort of like operate this stuff through your phone without needing a lot of the sort of hardware and stuff that people kind of feel that they
That's
need.
fascinating. I've seen somebody talking about running a claw in a browser, like local in browser, not
Yeah, no, I saw that on
so
Twitter yesterday or
yeah.
something too, I was thinking like, oh, that's kind of interesting. Yeah,
So OpenClaw is another subject that at some point we'll probably have to get into.
that's like a
Um,
whole episode into
but
itself.
it's multiple episodes, definitely. Uh, and we'll get to the topic for tonight. But one final thing is that I see behind you your YouTube award plaque. You
Right.
have you have a channel, and we'll mention it again later. But tell us a little bit about your channel.
Yeah, I guess so. Just like I sort of stumbled my way from music through to deep learning. Um, I never intended to be a YouTuber. Right? In fact, I don't even like the term. But what happened was when the Llama models came out, I was explaining the Llama model to people and how it worked and some details about it. And this happened like 3 or 4 times where I would get on a call and explain it, and I was like, okay, I'm done with that. Let's just record it as a video and stick it up on YouTube. And around that time, there was like a new model every week or two, right? As people fine tuned Llama, obviously Llama 2 came out, a lot of other models. It was real sort of inflection point. We had ChatGPT just being out for a little while at that stage. And so, yeah, the channel really kind of took off, and I kind of lent into it. I enjoy it. I'm not as serious about it as I probably should be. Like, I see a lot of other people take it a lot more seriously, uh, and while I've kind of worked out some parts of it, I tend to sort of just turn it on and record, right? I'm not sort of writing scripts or anything like
Right.
that.
Well, and
I
I'm definitely of the opinion that something overly scripted is too much in a lot of cases. That just turning it on and recording, get something very genuine and get something very personal and helpful. It
so
really
so
gets to
the best comment I got on one of my videos last week that someone wrote, which I really took as a compliment, was someone wrote, "This guy really knows what he's talking about, as evidenced by a time code, and he's not just reading a ChatGPT generated script about this." I thought, yes, right, that someone understands that.
someone
Yes,
gets it. Yeah,
someone
no,
gets
Mark and I, when
exactly.
we talk about doing the show all the time, we're like, yeah, we could script it, but and yeah, I could use a tool that gets rid of all the ums and ahs and and um but that's, that's human. That's personal. That's showing that really it's two people here that are talking. Um,
I do have an editor, and the editor is really good at taking out some of that sort of stuff. And we use AI to do a bit of the editing, like just to remove time gaps. Like I'm very conscious now that um most people tend to watch these videos, including myself, at sort of 1.5x or 2x,
yeah.
right? Uh, and they don't want like too much sort of in the way of pauses or things like that. So I do think that editing is kind of important, but yeah, I tend to just sort of uh,
Well,
open
it,
up and it all comes out,
right.
right?
And Mark and I just did a show about how I do the editing for this. And yes, I trim out the time codes and I trim out excessive ums and uhs, but some of it gets left in just because that's just how we talk.
Yeah, no, no, exactly, right? That's I get a lot of people asking me because we use like a noise reduction software, and the noise reduction software in Descript kind of sucks. Uh, it often will chop off bits of like the words or like just the
yeah.
ending syllable or
Yes.
something like that. And so people sort of say, "Oh, are you using AI?" And I was like, "I wish I was using AI. It would be so much easier if I was, using AI and stuff like that." No, I tend to just like turn it on. One of the things actually that sort of drove me in the YouTube thing was that I used to do. So we've got Google Colab, and I used to force myself to do a Google Colab each day of sort of playing with something new, whether that was a new model, whether that was how to do something with a model, that kind of thing. And they're what became a lot of the early episodes. And so I still try to show code in every episode and give away the collab. So like, if people want to, I just did one on the weekend for Kitten TTS, right? So this is a TTS system that's only 25 megabytes. You don't even need a GPU to run it, right?
Nice.
And I kind of felt like, okay, it's one thing for people to see me play with it. It's another thing for me to just say, hey, here's the collab. You go and run it yourself with whatever you want to try it out. Um, and I think that, I think people appreciate that they kind of realize that like, oh, okay, that's kind of cool that they can just, collab is so easy. And I always I try as much as possible to make it so people can use the free account and just spin it up and sort of run it and
Yep.
then spin it down. That does, there's very little investment of having to have an environment or anything like that.
So I feel like you and I could talk forever as we usually do. Um, but specifically, I think we wanted to talk this time about some of the latest models that have been out there and what's the big deal about them and how are developers, able to use them and so forth. And I already have a funny feeling we're going to split this into a few episodes. Um, but let's kind of take a look at let's start by taking a look at the big three: Anthropic, OpenAI, and Google's. And well, for starters, is it safe to call them the big three at this point?
I think generally those three companies are the leaders in sort of these kinds of models where they're going. Um, Certainly, at least their proprietary models. Their open models maybe not as leading as they once were, although hopefully that will change in the not too distant future. Yeah, we've seen lots of releases. Like so, I think in October we were talking about the Gemini 3 release that was coming. And then since then, we've seen multiple releases from Anthropic for each of the levels. So Anthropic has their sort of Opus, which is their biggest model, Sonnet, which is their sort of cost-effective but still very intelligent model, and then Haiku is their small, super cost-effective model. I think they've had each of those have had at least two releases since in the last 6 months. OpenAI multiple releases again, that have come out of there. And then obviously, yeah, Google's had Gemini 3 models come out, Gemini 3 Flash, and now Gemini 3.1 Pro.
Gemini 3.1 Pro, which I think surprised everybody, that I certainly wasn't expecting it. You know,
It, I think it was like I think the challenge that all these companies have at the moment is balancing marketing versus technology, right? Everyone has to
yeah,
appear to have the latest, best model. Uh, and it does seem like every 2 weeks now, we get one of the three companies saying, we have the world's, introducing the world's best model, right? And then 2 weeks later, it's like OpenAI introducing GPT 5.4, the best model, Claude, introducing 4.6, the best model, right? This kind of thing as we go through it. And, I think it's like up to OpenAI's turn now, right? Like we had Anthropic 2 weeks ago. Last week was Google, and then I guess this week or next week will be OpenAI.
So I asked Gemini what the latest models were, and it's telling me that OpenAI released last week as well. So
Right?
I don't, I don't know if
They
I can
had
trust
a
Gemini. I
yeah,
never
a
know
model
that.
that came out with codecs, the 5.3 codex model. They haven't released that, I don't think, yet in ChatGPT, and they haven't released it, I don't think, in the API yet. I'm not sure. I need to check that. Um, but I think the key point though is that there's this revolving sort of merry-go-round of like whose turn is it? Uh,
Yes.
and I think even from Google, 3.1 was an interesting model because it was the first point 1 release. It came, I think it's like 94 days after Gemini 3 Pro. And when 3 Pro was coming, I had early access to that. We continually got told, don't call it 3.0,
Right.
right?
This is
Just
not
call
the.
it
This is
the
Gemini
3.
3.
It's Gemini 3 Pro, Gemini 3 Pro, right? And multiple times when, working with people in DeepMind and stuff like that, they were sort of saying like, oh, obviously the people concerned with the marketing, right? And I think that, and it's a preview model, right? So in the past, we would have seen sort of 2 or 3 preview models for the .0 release or the .5 release before we got a GA release.
Right.
The fact that we've gone from 3 Pro preview to now 3.1 Pro preview without a GA is kind of interesting, right? That really does show us in some ways that we it really does show us in some ways that we're in this sort of marketing age now of
Yes.
where they have
Well,
to do it. Now that
was
said, I think it justified the bump in intelligence, the bump in what it can do, actually justifies calling it a point 1, right? I'm totally behind that.
see. Here's the thing. What I found interesting is when they released. So they released 3 Pro, and then it was a couple of weeks later that they released 3 Flash, and they were pushing the fact that Flash is faster with the same level of blah 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 blah. Right. Whatever. Um, One of the interesting things that I saw in the API is that for both of them, and even going back as far as 2.5, you've been able to set the thinking level
Right.
for it. And they changed how you set that in the 3 series versus the 2.5 series. So that was one change. But they also changed it between 3 Pro and 3 Flash. So 3 Pro only had 2 thinking levels, high and low, and 3 Flash had high, medium, low, and then this minimal, which is off but not exactly off. Um,
The I think the main sort of takeaway there is that what probably was the high before is now become the medium, and that the high is actually a different kind of high, right?
right.
Without
Well,
going into too many details, but I, uh, it is fundamentally, the model thinks a lot more. The model does, a lot more in that high mode now, much more than three Pro did.
right. And that was, I think, the interesting thing is that they brought those two more into alignment, at least in terms of API specification, is now more equivalent between the two, which is
I
an
think
interesting
that's
change.
yeah, it is an interesting change, and I'm sure we will see uh, more models come out, and we will see like the more of this family it is fundamentally still a family of models, right? Don't
Yes.
be fooled and that's one of the key things that we've got now. Anthropic has a family of models, Gemini has a family of models, OpenAI has a family of models. That's something I think that. we need to get used to, right? That the models, if we compare that to even sort of a year and a half ago, back then, um, you know, the challenge was, is the model smart enough to do what I want it to do? Now, a lot of the times more, it's like, is the model fast enough with low enough latency to
Yes.
do what I want it to do? I
And I think that's an important advancement, is that we're now, that the model builders are finally saying it's not enough just to get you the right answer. We have to do it fast enough that you can do something with this. Or we have to give you the ability to say, this is going to take a while, and that's okay, but the result will be exponentially better. So now putting it on us as developers to say, where along this spectrum do we need it?
Yeah, you definitely have this sort of Pareto frontier kind of idea of where um, you've got you've got this trade-off between intelligence, speed, or intelligence, latency, and cost, right?
Yeah.
I and I there are certain models that have always been really good at that. The Gemini Flash Lite models, when that like that was really confusing when it first came out, right? Of like, it was not that long after sort of Flash came along, and then it was like, oh well, actually in the Gemini paper there's this um I've forgotten, what the size were. Whether it was the 8B or 12B model or whatever it was, and they're like, oh, we could actually sort of put that into production, and that became the flashlight model. Um, and that model was very popular because it was, yeah, of course, it wasn't as intelligent as Flash or as Pro, but it was very quick and very cheap,
Very
and
quick and
people,
very,
you know, people
and
found that
and
that
it
was really
did
useful.
right. It did 90% of what people were
Yeah.
really needing to use these models for. And I think that actually kind of goes into one of the other things that I wanted to bring up. Reading through the model card, and you and I joked that we don't read model cards too much anymore. But one of the things that jumped out at me is that the model card identifies the knowledge cutoff date for the Gemini 3 models as being a year ago. The model cutoff date is January 2025, and that didn't change for 3.1. So they essentially, with very little additional knowledge pumped into it, they got a dramatic improvement over 2.5. And to me, that's kind of saying these models aren't about training it with more information. We're not getting improvements by giving it more knowledge. We're getting the improvements by tweaking the model to react to what it already knows in different ways. And when you do that, you are getting this range in the family.
Yeah, I think you're definitely seeing that, like, um, the whole sort of the whole scaling laws around these models used to be related all to pre-training, right? So you would each new version of a model, meaning a major version of a model, from 1 to 2 or something like that, or even maybe some of the 1.5s would have a new pre-training, and which means it's a whole new model. Uh, and that's where you would see the bump in, the cutoff date and stuff like that for what data was actually used for training it. Um, and back then, people were trying to cram as much knowledge, sort of, memory knowledge of like who was president in,
Right.
1832, or, that kind of thing, into the model. That has definitely changed. Now, because the models are getting so good at tool use, it makes much more sense to have it just look up Google, look up a database, look up an external tool to find out a fact.
Right.
So we don't want to rely on the model, to memorize all the facts, right? And so that means that the cutoff date is not as important as it used to be
Right.
for things like
Which, mind you, we've been saying since the beginning,
that.
these are
Yeah,
not
this is
fact machines. This is not what you want to use this for.
oh yeah, like Martin and I have been saying that since I think like 2018, 2019, right? So we had our first papers at big conferences in 2018 for LLMs. We had a number of papers in 2019 and stuff like that. And I can remember us literally having lunch and sort of going, gee, it seems kind of dumb to try and put all the knowledge into the weights. Like, really, what you want is a tool, right? An external tool. And sort of around that sort of 2019, 2020, maybe even sort of, some papers came along in 21 of how to do that. Those have become sort of standard now, or they've certainly laid the groundwork for what's become standard. Nowadays, the models are much more about, one, how do we get it to know what tools it should use? And then how do we get it to know what should be the input for the tool? So I think search is like a really simple example of that, of where if I ask it a question about a president, it can just basically say, right, I need the Google search tool,
Yeah.
and the keywords for that are going to be this, this, and this, right? Uh, and that will then go and get information. You may then need to sort of do some scraping of a web page or something to bring more detailed information back, but then you'll give that to the model. And this is what fundamentally what RAG is, right? The whole sort of retrieval augmented generation is this kind of task. Now, often it will be that it's done with a vector database rather than a search engine, but the fundamentals are still the same. So the models now are trying to get the models to be much better at aware at what tools to use, but also kind of better at logic and better at sort of coding thinking. So the big sort of stage that we're seeing now, and this has been in Gemini, in the Gemini API for a while, is this idea of sort of a code execution sandbox. And the sort of precursor to this, and the reason why that was put in at the start, was that as the models get better, you want them to write code server side, run that server side, get the results back for that code straight into the model, and then back via the API to the user. So the user's not having to deal with running these tools. The user's not having to actually sort of do this. And you can imagine that this is what Google is good at, right? And obviously a lot of other companies as well. But the ability for the engineering task of being able to spin up a sandbox, have some certain things accessible in that sandbox, run some code in that sandbox, and then return that back to the model, and then return back, a sort of response to us. I saw just recently, Anthropic's kind of chimed in on this. This is not new, right? This idea has been around for a few years. It's just that the models weren't quite there yet, right? We're seeing changes in the way that the models are being trained. This is why we're seeing the models get so much better at code. Like, I think people don't realize there are some fundamentally new techniques in how these models are being created. We talked about pre-training before. Training has got lots of different parts to it. You've got sort of pre-training, you've got some middle training, you've got post-training. So the main two are pre-training and post-training. In the past, pre-training was like where you load up the model with all the information. Post-training was where you kind of teach the model how to get that information out. So if I ask it, what year was Abraham Lincoln assassinated or something like that, that fact is going to be in the model because it was in the pre-training, meaning that if it's read the internet and it's trained on the internet, it's got that data in there. But in the past, the way we would have had to get that out would have been, we had to put in a continuation prompt where we said, Abraham Lincoln was assassinated on, and then it would give us the continuation of that, because that's how it would appear, in the internet. With new sort of post training with supervised fine tuning and instruction fine tuning, and the whole ideas around sort of chain of thought, meant that now you could kind of unlock parts of the model by giving it knowledge that it knew, right? That like that particular date, but now we could sort of train it where, okay, what day was Abraham Lincoln assassinated on? And then it would just give, and then we would train the date in. Now, it wasn't that we were training that date in to try and give it a new fact. We were teaching it just how to access that kind of fact out. And that's, that was like a huge revolution. That's what created ChatGPT. That's what created the Lambda models, if you know the Lambda models that, never got released. and they're interesting to talk about for many reasons as well. But the I that was sort of like the first phase of post training. We've now seen that change with different kinds of reinforcement learning. Um, and the sort of latest reinforcement learning is really fascinating because now we can kind of coax the model. So if the model's got like a 5% chance of getting the right answer, through reinforcement learning, we can coax that up to about 95 to 100% chance. And that's basically just through asking it the answer. It's almost like if I ask you the answer and you guess it, I'm like, nah, I didn't get it. We got kind of close. Try again, right? And then once you get it, I say, oh, I give you some kind of reward. Uh, and then as that reward gets trained into the model just gets better at learning these new patterns itself. And so now you've got that as a whole new way to sort of do this. Last one, and I'll be very brief. The sort of breakthrough that we've seen in the last few months has been RL environments. And what that basically means is that rather than just try to make a data set, they're now basically trying to give these models environments where the environment tells them whether they got it right or wrong. So a good example for that for code would be, does it compile, right?
Does it
Does it
compile?
run?
Yeah.
Yeah, like, and does it give the expected answer out? If if I've got a REPL there and I ask it to basically print something out, do I see what I'm expecting? And through doing that, you can now sort of get the model to train itself millions and millions of times, right? And
But it also seems to me like this is part of why having some of these environments as part of the model, as part of the post, as part of the post training and part of the operation becomes so useful, because now you can, the model's now trained that to solve certain problems, it writes a program and runs it. And it knows that if it can run, well, then it's giving you something of the right data.
yeah, no,
You
exactly, right. So it
you know
basically feeds all that back as data, right? Uh, and there are different ways to do this. And it's this idea has been floating around for a while, right? If you go back to sort of like the strawberry models from OpenAI, the O1, the O3, and stuff like that, they were also built around this idea. Gemini 2.5 Flash Thinking was the first model that sort of came out from Google. I think that it was using this kind of idea as well. The difference now, though, is where in the past maybe you had sort of 10, 100 different environments. Now we're talking about tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of environments. And those environments now are things like the thing that makes Gemini 3.1 so good is, okay, can you design a website that looks really cool? And it uses Tailwind, and it uses like a bunch of these libraries for doing animation and things like that. And if you've got the environment built in such a way that you can take a screenshot of that, and maybe a different version of Gemini says, "Oh yeah, that looks good," right? And it doesn't just look, "Oh, that looks like something from 1998 or something like that." Then the models get better and better at doing that. And we've seen Gemini lean in very heavily to design. So you could imagine, obviously this is not not being publicly announced or anything, but you could imagine that they've gotten RL environments that are very good at these design tasks. And at the same time, you could imagine that Anthropic and OpenAI are really doubling down or tripling, quadrupling down on the code environments,
yes.
right? And that's why we're seeing things like the Opus 4.6 model is still probably most people's favorite coding model. It's interesting that Gemini hasn't released kind of like a Gemini code or something.
That is
It would be
interesting.
interesting. Do we see that in the future? All these things are possible.
It also occurs to me that this kind of training also kind of goes into why increasingly they're pushing this notion of, you want tools with structured outputs, because the structured output, again, is something that they can teach the model really,
Yes.
really clearly. This is a good structured model. This is a bad structured model because it doesn't meet these rules. And to me, it's kind of interesting and amusing to me that back when we started when this whole LLM thing kind of blew up, we were saying these models are learning human language, and the human, poorly structured, all you need is attention type notion. And now we're kind of shifting back to the, hey, things that have a solid structure, that are predictable rules and clear rules, those are going to help the LLM out a lot. And it's kind of funny to me because, before the AI days, we were saying things like having a clear structure and well-defined rules is essential, and now we're kind of getting back to that. It's, I don't know, we've almost come full circle in some ways.
It's definitely interesting, yeah. Like, and you can imagine that, like, so in the past, the models kind of sucked at JSON, right? They would leave
Right.
a bracket off, they would leave, all this sort of stuff.
They would escape things wrong. Yeah.
But that's something that it's pretty easy for you to write a function that says this is valid JSON or not valid JSON. So you can see that even just that task can be put into a reinforcement loop, which basically gets the model to just continuously generate different kinds of JSON and get feedback on whether that was high quality or not high quality, right? Does that fit a certain set of rules? Where things become a little bit more interesting is when you've got sort of the intangibles, right? The things like design, the things like, common sense logic, these kinds of things. But even those, people are working on different sort of RL environments of how you can sort of quantify that. And all the models are getting better at it. We see this whether we're talking about the big three, whether we're talking about the open models from other companies around the world, everyone's slowly, starting to realize, oh yeah, this is the path. I think we definitely seen, and maybe we talk later about the Chinese models for a separate episode, but they've gone in that direction, right?
So yes, I was just about to say we are running out of time on this one. Maybe let's kind of pick this up at this point in another episode, because this is a fantastic conversation. So we will get back to this in a moment. Why don't you quickly give the best way for people to get a hold of you, or
I guess
continue this conversation, or find your YouTube channel?
yeah, the best thing is just check out, just do a search for my name and YouTube, and you'll find my YouTube channel. It's probably the simplest, or just look on Twitter. Uh,
Okay. So we'll pick this up again next time on Two Voice Devs. Thanks, Sam.
Thanks, Alan.